Toronto St. Paul's environment debate. Before the debate, a land acknowledgement. This debate occurs in Toronto on the traditional lands of Indigenous nations, including the Wendat, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Toronto, and St. Paul's riding in particular, continues to be home to peoples of a number of Indigenous nations. We seek tonight to promote a better life for all in this land and for generations to come through dialogue and debate. This debate is sponsored by Green Neighbours 21 and Seniors for Climate Action Now Toronto. I am Michael Green, and I'm a member of both organizations. Green Neighbours 21 is a community group in the St. Clair West area of Toronto, including the western half of Toronto St. Paul's riding. Green Neighbours 21 supports environmental initiatives of many kinds, from improving green spaces and promoting waste reduction to supporting energy retrofits and bicycling infrastructure. Seniors for Climate Action Now is a province-wide organization of seniors committed to strong and quick public action to meet the climate emergency. I would like to introduce the moderator and participants. Our moderator is Emily Chung. Emily is a senior reporter at CBC News, focused on science, climate, and the environment. She and her husband have lived in this riding for 12 years and have 2 kids who go to Hillcrest Community School. For this debate, we invited the 4 candidates who belong to parties represented in the House of Commons. 3 candidates responded and are present, and 1 did not respond. I would like to now introduce the candidates present today. In alphabetical order, Leslie Church from the Liberal Party. Hi, Leslie. Christian Cullis from the Green Party. Hi, Christian. And Amrit Parhar from the New Democratic Party. Hi, Amrit. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Emily.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks everyone. Welcome, and thank you for coming. So we're calling this a debate, but I think the idea is it's going to be pretty casual, and so it can be a debate or it could just be a conversation. It's really kind of up to the candidates. So how this is going to work is we're going to start with some intro questions, then we'll get into some policy questions, and then we're going to take some questions from the audience. So if you're in the audience, you can submit questions anytime through the Q&A, which should be at the top of the screen. And I'm going to start by asking each candidate a series of 4 intro questions that they got in advance. So we'll go in alphabetical order by last name. Everyone will get 4 minutes, and Ferrari will be timing. So he'll have the timer on his screen, so if you want to see it, you can rotate everyone in Zoom so that it's visible. Is everyone good with that? Okay. So the first person I'm going to ask the get to know you questions is Leslie Church with the Liberal Party.
Great.
So, okay. So my first question, I mean, you got all these, is how long have you lived or worked in this riding?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thank you very much for hosting tonight. I'm delighted to be here, and I really wanted to thank Michael, Emily, the Green Neighbours 21 for hosting a debate about a really, really important issue about our environment and climate change. Thank you very much, Ferrari, for putting up our time. Look, just as in a way of introduction, a little bit about me. So I moved to Toronto from where I was born, out west in Edmonton. I would say that hotbed of liberalism in Alberta, and moved here 22 years ago to go to law school, and came out here, loved Toronto, have never looked back. And throughout the time that I've lived here, lived in the community here, in and around Avenue and DuPont, lived in Summerhill, But what was really probably most special to me was moving to Davisville in 2011 with my now husband, where we got married, had our daughter, and called home for a number of years. St. Paul's is an incredible community. It is notably the best place to live in North America. And it is a really special place, a place of community builders, of people who care about the city, care about the community, care about one another. And that is what has really attracted us to call St. Paul's our chosen home. Now, I moved to Ottawa in late 2015 to work for the federal government, to work for the Prime Minister, and did what most families do when working for the federal government is hop in a moving truck, take the family up the 401, and stayed there for a number of years through a pandemic, working on some very, very tough files in our government around making sure that we got through that pandemic with supports for families and for businesses with the N95s and vaccines that we needed. And then most recently, for the past 3 years until last fall, at Finance with Chrystia Freeland as her Director of Policy and then Chief of Staff, and in charge of helping direct the federal budget and work on delivering some terrific programs, especially in this space that we're going to talk about a little bit more over the next hour, around energy and climate and protecting our environment in that capacity. So I've been out knocking doors for the better part of about 8 months here in Toronto, St. Paul's. My family, we are about 10 days away from getting the keys to our new home in Witchwood. And kids will be going, Emily, I heard your kids are at Hillcrest. Mine are starting at Humewood in the fall. And we are just thrilled to be back here and in a beautiful community. So
I have, oh, sorry, two more
yeah.
intro questions that I just wanted to make sure you would have time
Oh,
to get, 'cause
okay.
we've got like a minute left. So what's the impact that climate change has had on you personally or your neighbors in this riding?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what I find scary. I find it scary that for the first time, Toronto has worse air quality than Los Angeles. And, you know, that is a product of wildfires. That is a product of our climate change. And that concerns me because that goes right to the health of our community, to particulates and toxins in our air, to asthma in that our kids face. And
Okay,
so
you got
I'm,
15, sorry,
yeah,
seconds
so
left.
go
So I
ahead,
just
go
want,
one more.
so what is one thing you've done so far to help your community fight climate change?
Well, I have had a major role in Ottawa in actually helping shape the government's conservation agenda and in shaping the major over $100 billion climate action plan that we've put in place to try to drive new clean technologies, net zero technologies, emissions vehicle adoption, and to try to make sure that we are moving and hitting those net zero goals by 2050 and to make sure that we are on track and hitting our 2030 emissions targets. So I've done some very, very heavy lifting work around those policies in the government over the last few years, and look forward to talking more about that.
All right, thank you. So thanks very much. We're gonna move on to the intro questions for our next candidate, Christian Cullis with the Green Party. And I mean, they're gonna be the same questions. So I'm gonna start with the first one again. How long have you lived and or worked in this riding?
Thank you, and I'll echo the kind comments from Leslie. Thank you, folks, for putting this on. This is the issue of our times, the environment, and ensuring that we leave a livable planet for future generations. So this is the debate that I'm so happy to be here for. Cards on the table. I don't live in the riding. I'm just south. I live on Ossington. And I've worked since, I suppose, the office opened on June 1st, although previously in the community for a few environmental events, St. Patrick's Day and others. Been in Toronto longer than that, though. My dad's in North York. And whenever I've had a chance to walk around the neighborhood this past while, it's such a lovely area to live. And man, how beautiful a place we get, you folks get to call home.
So what did you do before you became a candidate?
So I work for Toronto City Councillor Diane Sachs at Ward 11. I was drawn to the position because she is the former environmental commissioner for Ontario, and the chance to get involved and make a difference on the municipal level for climate and making sure that our greenhouse gas emissions from building and really getting behind the Toronto Building Code as a very future focused set of policies has been incredibly exciting.
Okay. What's one impact that climate change has had on you personally or your neighbors?
I'm gonna take a broader scope on this question because we are all neighbors, we're citizens of the world. People are dying of climate change now. These are our neighbors. There are heat waves in Canada that are leaving people dying of heat exhaustion. The flooding in Pakistan is beyond belief. And it's an issue beyond all of us that crosses borders. And I think about my brother who is 15 as of last week, and the efforts that we are not putting towards preventing this crisis from escalating. This is a deeply personal issue for everyone.
Okay. What's one thing you've done so far to help your community fight climate change?
In 2018, I was a founding member of Extinction Rebellion Hamilton. And then I was a founding member of Extinction Rebellion Korea, or at the very least, the English-speaking side of that. We were never able to find a Korean side of it, but I was there at I initiated the first meeting over there to start the movement and get an awareness that, given enough time, I'm confident humanity can figure all this stuff out. Climate change imposes a time limit.
All right. Thanks very much, Christian. We're going to ask the same intro questions to you, Amrit. So I'll start again with how long have you lived or worked in this riding?
Yeah, thank you. And just going to echo what Christian and Leslie have said in terms of thanking you for having us join in this debate. In terms of how long I've lived here, I've been here for 1 year as a resident, but I've been working in the riding since about 2018. In fact, I've been helping youth in the area work towards climate initiatives, excuse me, it's been a long day, but also doing grassroots organizing and community organizing to make real sustainable change within their areas. And I happen to also sit on the board of the For Youth Initiative, which they have a location here on Oakwood Vaughan, which is nearby where I live. And so that's how long I've been working here.
Okay, and you've talked a little bit about what you did before you became a candidate. Did you want to expand on that at all, or just like explain a little bit more?
Of course. So I've been a grassroots organizer, community organizer for over a decade now. The work that I have done has been around labor, climate, looking at youth issues, mental health, our healthcare system, really working towards making a sustainable, effective, lasting change within our country and also within Toronto St. Paul's. I've worked many roles, primarily in nonprofits, everything from being a coordinator to HR director at an organization that used to be called Future Majority, now is New Majority, and they were really focused on getting young people out to vote, but young people involved on working on climate initiatives as well. And currently my previous role was, or my current role as I'm running in this election, is Director of Programs over at the Institute for Change Leaders, which is founded by our now Mayor, Olivia Chow, and she and I have worked together for many years now, almost 8 years, I think, 7 or 8 years, really going ahead and teaching folks how to make a meaningful, lasting change within their community. And to date, I've trained about 10,000 out of the 12,000 participants that we have worked with over the years. And again, on many issues, including working with early childhood educators, PSWs through the pandemic, survivors of gender-based violence, and really doing a lot of on-the-ground work.
Okay. Now, in terms of climate change, what's one impact that you've experienced personally or that your neighbors have experienced in this riding?
Personally, right now, I can tell you that my mother is in India visiting my great aunt and uncle, and they had a record-breaking 53 degrees Celsius weather happening there. And that's devastating because my family, my mother is 70 years old, my great aunt and great uncle significantly older. To see that it is getting this warm and this hot, and also honestly having personal friends and family who have been affected by the wildfires, it's devastating to see. In my personal riding and where I live in Toronto, St. Paul's, it's really the seniors and looking at the long-term care homes that have been impacted significantly over the years. It's a very vulnerable population, and even the building that I live in, it doesn't have very good ventilation, so I've been personally impacted by that as well.
Okay. And what's one thing you've done so far to help your community fight climate change?
Quite a few things. I work with many climate organizations, training folks on the ground on how to do work on the grassroots level. But I've also helped put through a bill in the House of Commons to get a ban on fossil fuel bans with Charlie Angus. I know I have 16 seconds left, but hopefully that answers the question. And I'm continuing to do more of that work with the group like For Youth Initiative and getting young people involved and making change on climate in their neighborhoods.
Okay, thank you very much, Amrit. So now the next section is where we're going to have more policy questions. So in this section, I'm going to give everyone 2 minutes to answer questions. And again, Ferrari will have the timer. If I think someone needs a chance to respond to another candidate's remarks, I'll call on them and they'll get 1 minute to respond. But of course, if you hear anything that you think was factually wrong or misrepresents something you said, please raise your hands and we'll get that sorted out. So for the first question only, I'm going to go in the order that you raise your hand in response to this question. So everyone know how to do that in Zoom? You all good? Okay, cool. I think we've all used lots of Zoom in the past few years. So one of the things for me as a journalist that's really interesting is that a lot of countries have made a lot of progress, often more progress in Canada in reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. And some of them have really interesting policies to encourage that. And so I'm curious, among all of you, what's one policy or program in another jurisdiction that you think is interesting or would be effective here that you'd like to share? Do you have any hands? I don't know if I can see them. I'm looking to see. Oh, okay. So I wasn't sure who raised their hand first there. It looked like almost the same time. Do you want to go? Okay, Christian has his hand up. So, and then Leslie will go next.
All right. Thank you for that. One of the big sources of emissions is getting into food production. And in Korea, one of the areas that they're focusing on is we have Meatless Mondays. They're also working to create incentives for vegetarian options. It's one of the things we don't think about regularly, but it's good to show people that you can have a tasty meal without contributing the same amount to emissions.
All right. So Leslie, did you want to
Sure.
share yours?
Look, I was actually just thinking of Europe and some of the building standards that they have in parts of, especially in some of the Nordic countries. I think one of the major areas for emissions reduction that we still have to dive into in Canada is around energy efficiency in our buildings and our construction. And it's actually an area where we haven't had nearly enough innovation in the last number of decades. We continue to build like we used to. And so I think actually one of the areas where we have to be doing a lot more exploration and innovation is in the building materials, building configurations of how to become more energy efficient as we continue to grow. Because as we try to get our emissions down, our buildings, our tall buildings in our major centers are going to continue to be major contributors to that. And so making the next breakthrough in how to reduce our emissions across the country is going to take a building strategy that addresses that. And I think Europe is a very good place to look.
Okay, thank you. Amrit, did you want to have a stab at this?
So thinking about this, one of my bigger kind of the immediate spaces that came to my mind was this one policy out in Denmark where they had passed legislation, I believe in 2021, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was really a climate act that really set an actual target to reduce their emissions by about 70%. And this was, I think they had a goal of reducing it from 70% by 2030. Whether they're on track on that, I'm not too sure yet, but this was something that they had passed. And that's something that I'm curious about and seeing if we can bring that into an actual legislation where we're able to really put that policy in to make sure that we're, again, also following through and having that accountability, putting the policies in place. And I think also looking at other programs where right now with the current rate that we're going, it'll take about 142 years to retrofit some of our low-rise buildings. If we're able to fit a retrofitting program, get those that sorted out with larger scale buildings as well, and hopefully get that done by 2050. That is something that I've been thinking about looking on and seeing on what we can do.
I think I heard a hand somewhere. Whose hand was that? Oh, Leslie.
It was just something else I was going to jump in with, Emily, and that's to say it's an interesting question for us, and we should be looking around the world. But I think it's also important to recognize that we are actually world leading in terms of our price on pollution, and I think that that's a big deal. I mean, it's countries around the world that when we've worked internationally, who actually give Canada credit for the fact that we brought this in, and it's one of the major contributors driving us towards actually beating our 2030 emissions targets that Canada has set out. And so one of the interesting things that we're going to have to deal with here in the coming years is actually also how to make sure that the way that we're looking at climate and the way that Europe is looking at climate is something that affects, how do we bring this into our trading relationships? How do we deal with border carbon adjustments that the European the European Union is bringing in? And so there's areas where Canada's definitely been a leader and can also be a country that tries to find the way forward here as more and more countries, especially our closest trading partners, make their own steps forward on climate too.
Okay, now we're going to have a question on the carbon tax as we go into our next section on with more policy questions. So maybe since you had brought that up, we'll do that one first. But I'm just going to mention that for the rest of the questions, we're going to rotate the order in which people answer questions. So actually, here's what we had as our question on the carbon tax. One of the current Liberal government's policies is a price on carbon for provinces that don't have their own equivalent policy. And that includes Ontario. And that carbon price will go up each year, more than doubling by 2030. And then the money is collected and rebated to consumers so that those who emit less carbon should end up getting more money than they pay. So what I was going to ask each of you is, do you support this policy as is? And if not, what changes would your party make? And the first person to answer this question was supposed to be Amrit. So why don't we hear from Amrit on this?
Sure. With that, the NDP, we still have not changed our stance or our position on the consumer carbon price. What we are saying is that we need to have an actual plan where we are able to, meet our emission targets, have an actual plan that's going to make sure that we're achieving that, which we're, from what I'm seeing, not close to. Making sure that we have our big polluters that are going to be paying taxes and paying out, so it's not coming out of our pockets, right?
Sorry, can we just go back a second there? Because you had mentioned that your position hasn't changed on the carbon tax. Now, I'm not sure everyone in the audience is familiar with what that position is, so maybe you could just spell that out.
So with that, it's we know that all Canadians are wanting to tackle the climate crisis. It is a real thing. And right now, what we are trying to do is what we're trying to focus on is making the big polluters pay what they owe. And we're going to try and focus on is investing the money into fossil fuel, fuel pumps, infrastructure for electric vehicles, and having clean transit. And that is kind of what our stance is right now, where
Okay. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that because it sounded to me as though you were saying that you want to keep an industrial price on pollution, but not one for consumers, and that instead of being rebated in some way, that this money would be directed specifically to climate programs. Am I right that that's what you were saying?
So what we want to do is continue to keep the money coming back to the actual consumers themselves, making sure that, someone like me who, if I'm going to be paying that tax, I'm making sure that and I'm getting that rebate, that I'm not losing out on that money and that funding. Because again, I want that money to come back, but making sure that the bigger oil companies, fossil fuel companies, that they're still paying out and that they're the ones who are taking out, that it's them that's being impacted and not necessarily us. Because we don't want it to happen where the marginalized folks that are on the ground are the ones that are being impacted by the taxes.
Okay, so just to clarify, you would still have a consumer tax or you wouldn't?
For now, we would keep it in place. Our position hasn't moved on that. And then, but what we ideally want to do in the future is to have it where we have a permanent removal of the GST off of the home heating. But that will be a future plan and not necessarily right now, that we're kind of in the midst of coming up with a plan, moving and adapting as we go. But that is our stance right now.
Okay, thank you very much, Amrit. The next person who was supposed to answer this was Leslie. You had already spoken a little bit about this, but maybe you could just clarify, do you support the current policy as is, or if not, what changes would your party make? And I know the Liberals have already made, some changes in that they took the carbon tax off heating oil, right, in Atlantic Canada. So maybe you could go from there.
Look, let me tell you what I believe. I believe that putting a price on pollution has been shown time and again by our top economists right across the country as a plan that works, a plan that is the most cost-efficient way to get us to our emissions reductions that we need to hit to meet not only the targets we've committed to, but frankly, to start addressing what Christian actually described as the existential issue of our time. So look, I think that we're all talking about this here today because, first of all, there's a lot of misinformation about what this policy is. And let's not forget that the money that is collected through the price on pollution is rebated directly to families in the province, in the jurisdiction in which it was collected. 8 out of 10 families do better because of those rebates. And so here in St. Paul's, that means that the average household is getting about over $1,100 back as part of their Canada Carbon rebate. So first and foremost, that is really important. And there's a lot of misinformation out there about where those dollars are going. The fact remains 8 out of 10 households are doing better as a result of those rebates than they are because of the price on pollution. Secondly, the industrial price on pollution is critically important. And it's one of the things that the elephant in the room here is we are missing our Conservative candidate in this debate. And let's be clear that Pierre Poilievre has no plan on climate. And which is ironic because it was actually Jason Kenney in Alberta who brought forward an industrial price on pollution so that Alberta has its own. Like the system works. The system works well enough that Alberta created its own industrial price on pollution. And that's something that we need to still be worried about here. It's our heavy industries. It is cement, it is steel, where where the price on pollution is actually helping to really bring down our emissions. So, I think what's really unfortunate right now is just the fact that, we are probably amongst ourselves having a debate about who has the strongest climate policy between parties that believe in the importance of climate change. Now, I think the Liberals have actually shown, in the 21 election, our platform was reviewed by environmentalists, by environmental organizations like Smart Prosperity, like Mark Chicard, and said that, we have by far the best and strongest green plan, climate plan offered by a party. So, I stand behind that. And I think that we have to fight it.
Thanks, Leslie. All right. So now, Christian, would you like to answer this question also? Do you support the carbon pricing policy as is? And if not, what changes would your party make?
Thank you for the question. And I never thought I'd come here and swing it back for a Liberal policy. Yes, most families are benefiting from the pollution pricing rebate. It's a shame that you can come up with a catchy rhyming slogan and start a real campaign around misinformation on that. An area where I noticed Leslie did not address is the exemption for home heating oil in the Maritimes for 3 years. And I have to wonder about that, because if there's a commitment to addressing climate change, but a specific exemption for a type of fuel known to be dirtier than natural gas, I'm wondering why in a section of the country where there's going to be a bunch of battleground ridings coming up in the next election, after the election set for 2025, but before future elections when the 3-year period will expire, why does that get a carve out? And yes, we can all talk about the strength of our platform and our plans for the future. But the knowledge of what needs to be done is nothing if there is not the will to act. And yes, I understand that there is the back and forth on, well, we'll lose those seats. So we have to compromise here. We have to find that workaround. But we can't compromise on climate change.
Okay, so I'm going to give Leslie 1 minute to respond to that.
Sure. I would just say our commitment to the price on pollution is steadfast. I also, though, think, Christian, that you actually need to have people behind you. Otherwise, we find ourselves in a position right now where we are at risk, of losing our total progress on climate change if we don't have Canadians with us. And part of the challenge with home heating oil, as you know, and as Amrit knows, is that the alternatives that are available right now are, first of all, they're very expensive. They are, can be up to $20,000 to retrofit your house with a heat pump. And even if you could do that, we don't even have enough heat pumps in production right now to meet that demand. So it becomes a burden, on Canadians in a way that a small temporary relief actually makes sense. That being said, you're talking to somebody who is in full support of making the investments necessary to amp up our production of clean technologies and clean manufacturing, and exactly the technologies like heat pumps, like home retrofits, programs that I've worked on in my role in government.
Okay, thank you, Leslie. I'm going to go on, I guess, since we're talking kind of about this. The oil and gas industry is Canada's largest source of emissions by sector, and the emissions from that sector are still rising under the current Liberal government, and even though Canada has international commitments to cut emissions. So what should be done to cut emissions in that sector, the oil and gas sector? And the person who will answer first is going to be Christian Cullis.
Thank you. So a big step is understanding what future we want to build. And currently, as reported by Environmental Defense, in 2023, the oil and gas industry received $18 billion in government subsidies. There's a long conversation you can have on this, and we only have 1 minute, 39 seconds. But the basis is, if your mouth's over here talking one thing and your money's over here talking another, there needs to be a way to resolve that disconnect. And while the Canadian economy does honestly in part depend on the petrodollar strengthened by the oil sands in Alberta, we are cooking ourselves to death. And to realign ourselves around clean energy and getting out of this industry, which we know is the driver of extreme weather and changes in unfathomable myriad ways to our way of life, yes, it's going to be a lot of difficult conversations and long negotiations and intelligent people downing Red Bulls for weeks to find solutions. But it needs to happen. And in the way to transition to a green economy, to prepare forward, it is looking at where we want to be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and making that shift instead of squeezing out the last bit of revenue that we can from the existing oil and gas industry and paying them for the privilege. $18 billion in dollars when they're not hurting, that I have questions and concerns.
All right, thanks, Christian. Leslie Church can answer that question next. What should be done to cut emissions in the oil and gas sector?
Sure. Well, a few things. First of all, I think the Liberal government and our climate plan, we've actually taken a number of really important steps. We've eliminated inefficient fossil fuel subsidies in 2023. We have put a cap on oil and gas emissions. We have introduced carbon capture, utilization, and storage, CCUS, major investment. And we are on track. We are world leading in terms of reducing our oil and gas methane by 75% by 2030. That is huge. So I think that we're actually taking a lot of steps to invest in clean grids across Canada, clean electrical grids, making sure that we have new sources of clean energy power. We are taking steps to invest in nuclear, solar, and wind. So those things are happening. There is still more to do, but I think we recognize that this doesn't happen overnight. There is, our economy that we actually also need to worry about. There are jobs at stake here that we need to worry about. But if there's anything that I know, it's that we have the expertise in Canada to become energy leaders in the new economy. And, you only need to look so far as to see some of the incredible new industries that are actually opening, in Alberta and especially in and around hydrogen that speak to this. So more to do, but most importantly, in this by-election, a vote, we have to think seriously about how we do vote and the message that we are sending, because again, it is Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives here who are going to roll back all of this. So, to everyone that's listening here, if you care about movement forward, if you care about progress towards clean energy, towards preventing climate change, to keeping on track with our emissions reductions, I really would ask you to really think carefully and look at our plan as being the most, by far the best plan that's underway. It's growing. There's more to do, but there's a whole lot to lose here if we vote. If you put your vote in other spots.
Okay, it's now Amrit's turn to answer this question. Amrit Parhar, what should be done to cut emissions in the oil and gas sector?
Thank you. One of the bigger things is going to be, of course, ending and going after, fossil fuel subsidies, making sure that's not a thing, taxing anyone who, like the big oil companies that have had excess profits, making sure that we put a tax onto that, investing in our eco energy retrofits to reduce our energy bills, or looking at working with our province really, and working with the other levels of government to also make sure that there is a climate accountability, to have strict rules and stopping the big companies from purchasing, so from making the purchases that don't have or meet the net zero obligations that we are setting. And with the money that has been spent, if there is, $18 billion worth of subsidies that have been given or support that have been given to oil and gas companies, putting an end to that and having that money be put towards programs like getting our heat pumps up and ready. That is a big piece, spending money on renewable energy and actually fulfilling some of the commitments that we have made to ending and eliminating fossil fuel subsidies. Having low carbon initiatives, that's a big piece that we're trying to put through. And again, for future pieces, legislation to ban future oil gas pipeline subsidies from going forward, making sure that the money is being spent correctly and that we are not the ones to suffer as residents ourselves here in Toronto St. Paul's.
Okay, thank you, Amrit. So a number of you have talked about things that we could be doing, and Leslie talked about things also that have been done. I was wondering, for all of you, Canada has one of the highest per capita greenhouse gas emissions in the world. What is one program or policy? Do you think there has been a program or policy that Canada has implemented that you think is helping us reduce greenhouse gas emissions? And I'm going to start with Leslie Church for this one.
Well, Emily, I mean, I think that we've been talking about a number of different ways that I mean, there's no one silver bullet to this, but if you look at the Liberal climate change plan, I mean, it begins with a price on pollution. It includes making progress in the transportation sector. It includes investing in EVs, not only the acquisition of EVs, but also the manufacturing of EVs here in Canada. It involves moving to greener buildings, and we have actually invested in that green infrastructure on everything from our campuses to our, helping Canadians actually retrofit their homes, and then it also goes into the work that we're doing with across industry. And so I mentioned cement, I mentioned steel. We've got some of the greenest steel in the world. We are trying to green our industries because not only is it good for the environment, it's good for the economy, and these things can go hand in hand. So, I would say that we've talked a lot about that. Maybe one area that we haven't also talked about that I think is really important are also natural solutions. And I have to tell you, I am extremely proud to be part of a team that is going to hit conserving 30% of our land and water by 2030. And, we are planting trees, we are cleaning up the Great Lakes, we are, introducing new urban and national parks. This is part of the whole of Canada response to how do we address climate change and how do we address rising emissions. So you have to be working in all of these areas because one of them alone won't get us to the finish line. And so that's work that I've been a part of, and I'm really proud to work to continue.
Thanks, Leslie. Amrit, did you want to take a stab at this one? Is there a policy that Canada has already implemented that you think has been helping or could be helping?
I think with, while the sorry, give me 2 seconds, my brain just lost the train of thoughts. So while the federal tax and the cutting is like a first step, right? That is a first step. It doesn't complete everything. It's at least getting us in the right direction, right? It's the right step in the direction we want to go. It's our first step. I think now continuing on, going forward, it's really continuing to develop a plan and always adapting and learning as the world changes. like for example, last year we saw our wildfires that were happening and how Toronto, we ourselves had been impacted by that. Working with our economists, our environmentalists, are the people who are on the ground and really, really focusing in on continuing that work and seeing and really innovating that work and innovating a new plan to continue forward. So one is at least taking a step forward and continuing to make a new plan to make sure that we're able to keep up with what is about to come our way, because again, we only have one planet, we have one shot at this to make our city as clean as we can while we can. And that's what I think is at least a good step of what we've been trying to do.
Okay, thank you. Christian, did you want to talk about, is there anything Canada has been doing so far that you think is helping us reduce greenhouse gas emissions and maybe should be, I don't know, built on or?
Absolutely. And again, credit where credit is due. There have been a lot of steps made by our current government to green our steel, to address things where they can easily be addressed. There is a deeper underlying need for an end to the status quo. I grew up largely in a semi-detached home in the suburbs. It was great. And for a country with a growing population, it's not sustainable. And the thing with sustainability is it's not just the nice newest eco buzzword. Either a process is sustainable and can continue indefinitely, or it's unsustainable and will inevitably have to stop. The way we live is unsustainable. It's not a fun answer, but it's true. And there's been so many assumptions made about how Canadians live their day-to-day life that will, by necessity, like it or not, need to change. So in addition to the policies that have been implemented, round of applause, we need to see a change in our transit networks. There are areas out in the country where transit is not currently a viable option, and it will take a lot of elbow grease and legwork to get it to a place where it is. And even then, there is a place for cars. Electric cars themselves, I mean, there's questions as to whether or not the planet has enough lithium to genuinely convert all of our vehicles over. So the solutions we're talking about aren't just greenwash, find a suitable eco alternative to the thing we're already doing. It really is a rework of how we live, ultimately for the better and for a human-scaled, human-friendly society.
All right, thank you, Christian. My next question, a lot of, earlier we discussed the fact that all of us have experienced some of the effects of climate change. We hear in the news also about, the extreme heat that's happening in many places, the flooding, the wildfires. What is one way your party would help Canadians adapt to the impacts of climate change, like extreme heat, flooding, and wildfires? So maybe Christian, why don't you start?
Thank you for that. And this is our platform, our party is based on this ideal. You can correct me if this figure is wrong, but the current government has $3.4 billion nationwide for a climate adaptation and mitigation fund, which spread out over all of Canada isn't quite peanuts, but it's not far off. And every aspect of the green platform is dedicated towards reorganizing ourselves around, yes, it's going to get so hot in Saskatchewan that the species of wheat we've grown to be climate resistant aren't climate resistant enough. And we can double down on investment in breeding new strands that can resist the extreme temperatures we're going to get. But it's going to take more than that. It's going to take creativity and blood, sweat, and tears. And I would love to be able to come forward with a big bright smile and say, come on, guys, we can just tighten our belts and everything will be fine. That's the story that's comfortable. The story that's real is it is going to take emissions reductions in housing, in transit, in food production, in manufacturing, in everything, all to a degree that, while daunting, is necessary. And because it is necessary, we will find the courage to make those changes reality. There is no alternative.
Okay. Amrit, did you want to talk about what your party would do to help Canadians adapt to impacts of climate change, like
Sure.
extreme heat, flooding, and wildfires?
Yeah. I know that this is a big issue that's been happening, and we've seen the direct impact, I think, immediately of a group that I worked with, the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. And I think about this one doctor, I'll call her Anna, and the story that she told me where in 2022, she had been, working in BC in the NICU, and she was a neonatal doctor in the intensive care unit, and just the horrific stories of not only hearing her personal view, but the parents and the nurses and the team who were just so devastated by what was happening around them, and seeing that there were these brand new lives and how impacted they were being with what was happening around them. And with that, it completely breaks my heart. And like I mentioned earlier, my mom right now is, seeing the extreme heat that's happening across the world in India right now. And with the wildfires, I know that there are other folks like the Conservatives who have no plan on how to fight the climate crisis. In fact, they just want to go ahead and just protect the profits of the big oil companies. But the NDP, our big thing is, again, ending the fossil fuel subsidies, taxing the excess profits of big oil companies, and investing in eco energy retrofits to help reduce the energy bills of our people, and to make sure that we are investing in, again, clean transit, that we have the infrastructure to allow for electronic vehicles, and that we have that we can lower our emissions by also having fossil fuel pumps.
Okay, thank you. Leslie, would you like to answer this question about adaptation?
Yeah, no, and look, and I want to pick up on things that both Amrit and Christian have mentioned, because look, I think that this is, I mean, Amrit, your point about how essentially we're going to go into a world where we have more and more climate migration and climate emergencies right around the world. We have to be ready for that. And there are other, countries that are on other coastlines, particularly down south, are dealing with this already. And, Christian, to your point about just how we deal with our mitigation assistance across the country, there is a climate lens that is put on every government policy now. That is new in the last number of years, but we're looking at it in terms of our coastlines, our power grids, our emergency response capabilities. We're looking at our housing standards. We are looking at how do we provide flood insurance and other types of insurance to individuals, in addition to just how we support provinces when they're dealing with these crises. So look, this is that point in the debate where, in other debates, you might have an empty chair, but the fact that we're on Zoom here, you kind of want an empty Zoom window for the Conservatives here, because climate isn't just about one policy. It is about how we actually go forward as a country, and all of these challenges that are going to hit us and hit our kids and grandkids in the coming years, that we have a responsibility to be looking at that climate lens in so much of what we do. So I think that the people that are here are serious about this. They are serious about the problem. We may have different ideas to move forward on in the short term, but what we need to be doing is more of this, of actually the dialogue and building coalitions, building partnerships, because it's going to take all of our creativity to actually move forward in a way that addresses this problem, not only for Canadians, but actually globally in the years to come. And that's why you got to show up. And it starts with showing up for a debate about this.
All right, thank you. We're now going to move on to audience questions. So the first question we have is about Indigenous rights. So the question is, promoting electric vehicles as the alternative to gas vehicles in their manufacture in Ontario is seen as a win for reducing emissions and creating good jobs. But many First Nations in Northern Ontario have withheld their free, prior, and informed consent from mining critical minerals needed for electric vehicles in order to protect the land which sustains their way of life. In situations like this, where Indigenous rights are in conflict with economic projects, does your party prioritize Indigenous rights and reconciliation? And I don't know, I guess we haven't started with Amrit very often, so I think recently. So why don't we start with Amrit to answer that question?
Sure. Let me just see if I can find it. I'm more of a visual person when it gets to the question. It's a very long question. But 100% we are wanting to work and be equal partners when it comes to Canada's efforts to confront the climate crisis, but also working with the Indigenous peoples. And we want to make sure that they're at the table when we're having these discussions and when we're talking about making these changes and also looking at the resources that we possibly need for these EVs. And so that is part of what the party does believe, is working together to make sure that we can come together and make that change effectively together.
Okay. Let's see. Christian, do you want to answer this question?
Absolutely. I see in it a not entirely accurate dichotomy between moving forward on climate action and continuing the critical process of reconciliation. In an area, in treaty lands, in Indigenous areas, they are sovereign. And if there was a really appealing area in North Dakota, we couldn't just go in there and say, well, we'd like that now. You have negotiations nation to nation on what's to be done. And that's a conversation that, when it happens, is going to be based on respect. It's going to be based on mutual beneficial solutions, outcomes. And it's going to be one where people at the table want to be there. If there's not mutual buy-in, well, then that's not how deals get made.
All right. And Leslie, did you want to answer?
I think absolutely. I think reconciliation is critically important in these processes. I think Indigenous engagement from the outset has proven to be the way to get projects moving forward and for the benefit of all involved. And I think that responsible stewardship of these resources and of our natural environment and of the interests and wishes of our Indigenous peoples are paramount, and they go hand in hand. But the good thing is, I think we can do it. And I think we've shown that we can do it. Increasingly, in the last number of years, we have examples coast to coast to coast of projects that are engaging Indigenous communities, where Indigenous communities aren't just being consulted, but are actually partners. And that is important for the long-term prosperity of Indigenous communities that are affected by some of these projects. And I think, and that's a good thing, right? So I think, it shouldn't be looked at as a barrier. It shouldn't be looked at as a simple stage in a development process. I think that these have to be approached as partnerships, and I think that they are better because of it.
All right. We did have a part 2 to this question, which was, how will your party help enact the Reconciliation Action Plan in Toronto, St. Paul's Riding? Now, whoever asked that question, are they here and or does someone want to explain what the Reconciliation Action Plan is for those who are not familiar with it? All right. I think, who is that? Who just raised their hand? Ferrari.
So apparently the reconciliation action plan uh is a, I think, initiative I think in the city that like it has to do with relationships with the indigenous people. I didn't have time to look deep into it. Something like that.
Okay. You know what? I think we'll just pass on that for now because, I think it's more helpful for people to know what the question is asking. So we're just going to pass on that for now and move on to the next question. So the next question is, Toronto has an internationally acclaimed climate mitigation and adaptation strategy called Transform TO. It is an ambitious strategy, but to date has lacked the political will and funding required to be a success. Will the candidates work with the City of Toronto to ensure that the goals of Transform TO are achieved? And if so, how? Well, did someone want to talk a little bit about the goals of Transform TO? Is that just climate mitigation and adaptation in general?
I can speak to this.
Okay.
So Transform TO is Toronto's roadmap to get to net zero by 2040, 10 years earlier than the general 2050 targets. It is an incredibly ambitious plan, and I won't claim too much credit. This is not entirely my show, but it's been very exciting to see it develop and continue to say the right things. Say the hard and, well, actually, how are we going to achieve this things that we know need to be achieved? And to compromise on good enough policies really isn't good enough. And as a particular note, in speaking with someone in the industry, they mentioned that the Ontario Building Code, this plan is doing so much more than the Ontario Building Plan. And I said, well, is that actually a reasonable plan? And the answer was no, or the answer was more diplomatic than that. But you need to have a standard that's meaningful. And if you don't, then people can claim credit for exceeding a low bar.
Okay. So how would you work with the City of Toronto to to achieve the goals of Transform TO, I guess, is what the question is.
Well, that was most of the minute. So I'll say
Okay.
support its spread. Support its spread.
Okay.
Time.
All right. Leslie, did you want to answer this one?
Yeah, sure. I just think that you're probably going to get a sense from all three of us here today that we're open to being partners with the city on initiatives like this. I mean, I think that the fact that Canada has brought its own net zero plan to the table, we are really hoping to see provincial partners, we're really hoping to see municipal partners adopt this as well. So I think whether we want to talk about transit, whether we want to talk about buildings, whether we want to talk here in St. Paul's about revitalizing and extending our green spaces, right? And some of our natural infrastructure, which the federal government also supports. I think that these things are great and they are important and that people here believe in them. And so what I think the community here in St. Paul's really wants is somebody who is going to carry this voice not only to Ottawa, but also to the city and be somebody who is a bridge builder, who can pick up the phone and who will work with other partners, regardless of the level of government or the political stripe, just to deliver on some of these things, because we know that issues like this just aren't within the jurisdiction of one government or another, but instead actually affects us all and we all have our part to do. So if we want to talk transit, if we want to talk recycling, good ideas come from everywhere. And I'm sure that there's a lot of different ways that we can partner to make sure that we're all moving forward as a country to hit our goals.
Okay, Amrit.
Yeah, like Leslie said, I feel like we're all going to be on board with working with this initiative. And I think for myself personally, I've been working with a lot of the city councilors already. I've been working with Mayor Chow now for many, many years. And so it's just continuing to look at the different strategies that we have, supporting, doing a bit of that community engagement and really supporting that front and making sure that we're able to meet the goals and the action and take the actions in a meaningful way to make sure that we are able to have transform TO be successful. And I think a part of that is also going to be, again, as the inner grassroots organizer in me, is getting the youth engagement out, getting the community outreach out, talking to the people, and if I am elected, my constituents, and seeing, okay, what is it that you want me to do? How it is that we can actually come together to make sure that this platform goes through and that we are able to get the goals of Transform TL.
All right. Next question is about conservation. What measures will your party take to protect Canada's natural habitats, wildlife, and biodiversity? And Amrit, why don't you go first for this one?
Sure. So with that, protecting our land, water, our biodiversity, with the party, what we're looking at doing right now is looking at our Canadian Bill of Rights, Environment Bill of Rights, to ensure that we have that guarantee of clean water, clean land, clean air, strengthening our environmental protection acts and making sure that we have those policies in places, and then also having a committee to hold us accountable to that, right? A big thing is that we can make all the promises that we want, but often promises end up being broken by many governments in the past, and probably will end up happening in the future. But what we're hoping to do is to set up an advisory committee to hold us accountable and have that independent oversight. Also having bills to protect us from toxic substances and banning our single-use plastics, working with our cities and working with the infrastructure and the organization that we do have to also reduce food waste.
All right. Christian, did you want to answer this one? About what your party will do to protect Canada's habitats, wildlife, and biodiversity?
Yes. We often forget that we are not separate from the natural world. A bird makes a nest, humans make cities. And we don't live imposed over the natural world. We live in and around it. And so protecting our wetlands, protecting our old growth forests, on one hand, there is these are nice things. The other hand is it makes good sense and is good policy to ensure that our world is the way we found it, as much as possible and as often. So as a starter, we're not looking just to extend our protection to 30% of oceans and land. That's a minimum, and 50% by 2025, by 2050. Prioritizing carbon-rich ecosystems like wetlands that act as carbon sequestration. We want to scale up funding for nature-based solutions to ensure that there's that benefit economically from preserving these spaces. There's ecotourism as a way to keep people putting food on their table, and more solutions like that are critical.
All right, thank you. Leslie, did you want to answer how your party would protect Canada's natural habitats, wildlife, and biodiversity? I know you already talked about the 30%, but go ahead.
Yeah, which I think is I think an important step in getting to Christian's longer goal. So let's get to 30 by 30. And look, this is I think so close to so many Canadians' hearts when it comes to thinking about how do we protect, how do we conserve species at risk, our very special marine and coastal areas in Canada. We've got work underway to do that. We have put over $3.5 billion towards species at risk and to conserving our land and marine areas. I think $1 billion towards marine and coastal areas in particular. We're making additional investments in Indigenous-led conservation as well. But the thing that I really wanted to come back to was actually also talking about plastics. because I think that we are all increasingly aware of the contamination that plastics are causing in our environment, in our communities. And the commitment to get to zero plastic waste by 2030, I think, is achievable. And it has to be something that, again, we're working in partnership with municipalities and provinces to get there. But it's going to have one of the, I think, the single greatest impacts on our conservation and on our species protection going forward. So that's something I'm extremely supportive of. And again, I know that I mentioned it previously, but our additional urban and national parks, I think it's very important for Canadians to have those parks protected and to grow our network of national parks, and to be continuing to make key investments in cleaning up our Great Lakes. And we've just set up a brand new water agency. So, I mean, there's lots underway that we are working on. There's more to do, but I think we can get there.
Yeah, we're out of time. Thank you. The next question is actually directed directly at Amrit. So, Amrit, sorry, this person asks, can you be more specific about your party's plan to promote renewable sources of energy? Amrit?
There we go. Yeah, so this was looking at the renewable sources of energy, correct? Just double checking. Perfect. Yeah, so right now I will say that the party is also working on adapting and updating our plans, especially for the next round of elections. So right now what we're working on is looking at and talking to a lot of folks that are on the ground, the economists, the environmentalists, and the folks that have the expertise to see, okay, one, where are we right now as a party and as a group on our plans and our goals, and then also what is it that we need to do to continue going forward. And so that is where I know that in the next 6 months or so we're going to be adapting and changing our plans. What that is right now, I can't tell you. We're still in the research phase, but do look out on a much more updated version of our plan in the next 6 months or so.
All right, now Christian raised his hand. So Christian, do you raise your hand because you heard something that, well, anyway, I'll let you speak.
Well, thank you. And there is a portion of the platform that this is just such a great opportunity to share. There are a few venues that will appreciate getting so in the weeds on this topic. So we have in Canada a fractured energy grid. What's out in BC is not what's out in Halifax. And as it happens, east to west is the way that the planet spins around its axis. So a plan to connect our energy grid coast to coast means that when the sun is shining in BC, it can move across. When the sun is shining in New Brunswick, it can move across the country. And we can address the issues that we have at the moment with battery and energy storage, which I think this crowd would appreciate.
All right, thank you. And since you've both spoken about renewable energy, Leslie, did you want to have a quick word about that too?
I think I've covered some of this, but I just think that, we have made some massive strides forward in terms of supporting the development of clean energy industries in Canada. And I'm excited by that because the same expertise that has actually made us an energy superpower in conventional energy is the expertise that's actually going to take us forward in clean energy. And so whether it's hydrogen, whether we're looking at new forms of nuclear, whether it is solar or hydroelectric, I mean, there is so much interest in what Canada is doing in these spaces and so much opportunity for us to actually share some of our innovation with the world that this is truly the way of our future. And I think our Liberal government is betting on it as one of the major areas for growth in our economy. And so, I mean, I think that just is going to help our businesses, help our workers, and help us all as we look towards a much cleaner energy future.
All right, thank you. The next question is about fossil fuel development. Would you allow new fossil fuel development? Would you issue new permits or other aspects of for extraction, distribution or use within federal authority. And Leslie, why don't you answer this one first?
Well, look, I think that, I think that we are in a transition moment. Like I said, I think that we are, we have to recognize that this is a path that we're on for the next, decades yet. But I think that we're putting in the right policies, the right measures to get us to a future where we have alternative sources of clean energy to use in our daily lives. I think that it's still important that this Liberal government has invested in the Trans Mountain project, which is one of the most significant infrastructure projects that's been completed, and it's still a major part of our needs and our economy. But I think that going forward, we are very, very quickly developing the alternatives that exist. And so that's what I'm driven by. It's really looking forward to the future of what alternatives are out there. How do we capitalize on the fact that, investment around the world is looking for new clean options? And that's the space that we really need to be in.
Okay, so I heard the answer to that was kind of like, yes, but not for long, kind of, or something like that. Yeah. All right. Amrit, do you want to answer this one?
Can you repeat the question for me one more time, just so I can?
Would you allow new fossil fuel development? No, or would you ban all new permits or other aspects of extraction, distribution, or use within federal authority?
With that one, I think I would say that we could look into it, explore, see what actually is out there. Again, very similar to what Leslie said, it wouldn't be for a very long time. It's just more on the sense of, let's see what is actually there, see what we can actually extract, if there is anything, and if it's worthwhile doing. If not, no.
All right. Christian, do you want to answer this one? Would you allow new fossil fuel development?
No. I appreciate that we are in a transitional moment with the economy. The thing to do with the thing that's killing us is to taper off. And when Halliburton reports $23 billion in profits, and they use a good portion of that money to continue to lobby for why not now, tomorrow. It's come on, guys. Let's not get rash here. It's not how we get to the place we want to be. I once heard fossil fuels compared to societal cocaine. It makes you move really fast, you feel really good, you get a lot done, and you always need more. And the crash is terrible. We have such a powerful lobby pushing off the necessary transition when what we need to do is to begin to dial this back and find the alternatives which are out there and do work today.
Okay, so now we're at almost 8:50. Do we want to do, Mike, one more question? Or do we want to wrap up? I think we had said we would wrap up around now.
One more question is fine.
Okay, so let's do one more question. This question is directed specifically at Leslie. Why is the Liberal government funding carbon capture, utilization, and storage technology when it is a technology that has been proven inefficient? Now, I don't know, do we mean inefficient economically or inefficient compared to other methods of reducing carbon emissions? Probably both. I presume the person who wrote this is probably meaning one of those things.
Look, I think it's important. I think it's actually an extremely important investment to be making for two reasons. One is because it does apply across industries, right? So, here in Ontario, cement, for example, can be an industry that benefits from CCUS. Direct air capture can be part of CCUS. I think that they're, helping the industries, and this is maybe where I differ a little bit from Christian's perspective, helping industries that we know are going to continue to produce emissions, but that we rely on for everyday things, for everyday life, until we go through this transition. Making sure that they do it with less of an impact is exactly where we should be. Secondly, it's also an opportunity for Canada to innovate and to share our technologies and to lead the world. And I think that that's an area that we should be proud of. So look, I support CCUS, and I actually think that it's actually a good move for Canada to be investing in.
All right, thank you, Leslie. Did the other parties did the other candidates want to share their party's view on carbon capture?
I'll
All right, go ahead, Christian, please.
Absolutely. Carbon capture is a technology that we need to continue to develop, an industry that will play a role in abating the worst impacts of climate change. It needs to be done right. And it's very easy to point to existing policies that say, we're going to plant 1 billion trees, and the trees are going to grow, and the trees are going to take up carbon. And, oh, isn't that great? Don't need to worry about it. Trees aren't, it's the absolute bottom of the barrel when it comes to carbon sequestration, because yeah, the tree lives and then the tree dies, and all of that carbon goes right back into the system. The most expensive options, the ones that are currently not incentivized by policy because it's just reach for that lowest hanging fruit, are the ones with the most meaningful impact, and they're the ones where we need to make the most strides in developing and implementing.
Okay. Amrit, did you want to talk about your party's policy on carbon capture, or do you just want to pass? It's totally up to you.
Pass. I can pass.
Okay, no problem. All right, in that case, I will let you be the first to have your closing, which, my last question to you is, of all the things you've said tonight, what's the one thing you hope people will remember?
Thank you. In my case, I think the biggest thing that I want people to remember is that I have been doing a lot of this work on the ground for the last decade, and actually getting things done, checking the list off, doing the grassroots community organizing, and making sure that we have clean, sustainable environment here in Canada. And one of my biggest things, and the little line that I've been saying, is that if I've been able to get things done on the outside over the last few years, including getting bills passed into the House of Commons, just imagine what we can do if I am elected on the inside. There are many things. I'm open. I'm someone who truly does believe that the people who are on the ground, we have the power to make the changes that we want to see. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Amrit. Leslie, did you want to share something of all the things you said tonight? What's something you hope people will remember?
Sure. I think only that, this is, well, first of all, let me just say thank you, because this actually has been more of a conversation and a dialogue than it really has been a debate. And I think that we are in close agreement here in terms of at least what we see as the scale of the challenge ahead of us. And on that front, I think probably even everyone that's tuning in here would agree that, we have to be really focused on climate change. We have to be focused on making sure, I started off by saying I was really concerned about even just something as simple as how our air quality has deteriorated as a result of wildfires, as a result of climate change right here in Toronto. That is a very real and tangible deterioration that we're tracking. And so if we care about that, and we care about how to fix that for our kids and grandkids, having a serious, credible plan to fight climate change should be table stakes for any government. And so the choice ahead really in this by-election, and that's why you've gathered us here today, is to kick the tires a little bit on, the candidates that are putting their names forward. I hope that you consider, I hope everyone listening here really considers the fact that, Canada has a world-leading climate change policy in place. We certainly have more to do, but we have been making the progress that we need to on conservation, on mitigation, on adaptation, and on innovation as well. These are all different pieces of the climate plan that we need to have going forward, and that the alternative here to a Liberal being a voice in Ottawa for these issues and building bridges across all levels of government to actually deliver and get things done on these issues is the Conservatives who didn't show up, and a Pierre Poilievre led government that has, Pierre Poilievre himself, who has voted against climate and the environment over 400 times in his tenure as a member of Parliament. That is not where we need to go, not where we want to go. So I really hope that you consider putting your support behind me, and I would be very honored to serve in that capacity to take these concerns forward and work with everyone here on this call today. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. Christian, did you want to say what you think is the thing you hope people will remember of the things you said today?
Yes, and again, thank you to the organizers. Thank you to Amrit and Leslie for having the basic decency to show up. I haven't said the thing that I'd like to leave, so I'll say it now. On June 24th, we have a by-election, and it is an opportunity to send someone to Parliament. With respect, the difference in sending a Green versus anyone else to Parliament is the difference in no change to the status quo. There can be 118 to 119 Conservative seats, 24 to 25 NDP seats, and you'll have to forgive me, 168 to 169 Liberal seats. We know who the Prime Minister is going to be the day after the election. And in a year and a half, there's going to be a general election. Any other choice isn't going to change the conversations happening at dinner tables around Canada. You can say, oh, well, a by-election victory for the Conservatives is going to really fire up the base. It's going to start that wave of momentum, which we all agree we do not want to see. And to that, I'd say, as a question to the audience, do you remember the June 2nd provincial by-election in Milton? Do you remember the June 19th, 2023 election in Portage-Lisgar? Statistically, you're in the minority if you do. By-elections like this get local attention, but nationally, the power that you have with your vote is by saying you want change, that the other parties have not done enough or been bold enough on climate to win your support.
Thanks very much, Christian. And thanks to all of the candidates. I'm now going to turn it over to Mike for, the closing.
I want to echo that. Thank you to all the candidates for showing up and telling us your views on the climate. And I'd like to also take this opportunity to thank all the volunteers. And I'm going to list them by name. Lee Adamson, Christine Baer, Beryl Pilkington, Alan Silverman, Melissa Yule, and Ferrari Zhang, and to our tech team. And I want to thank also Emily Chung for sharing her journalistic talents with us as moderator. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good night, everyone.
Take care.